So with that, I think we're good. I'm going to pass it over to Connor to introduce himself and give us a land acknowledgement. Oops.
Thanks, Betsy. I'm Connor. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Advocacy and Engagement Manager at the Mountaineers. I've been on Betsy's team for coming up on 3 years. I lead our communications, conservation communications, and member engagement work. And just want to say I really appreciate you all joining us tonight. And to kick us off, I'm going to share a brief land acknowledgement statement. So, at the Mountaineers, we strive to recreate mindfully and respectfully on the traditional lands of Native peoples, and our natural places aren't something to conquer, but they're spaces to find connection, belonging, and community with each other and the natural world. And one of the places that first connected me to nature while growing up here in Seattle was Lake Washington, and the summers I spent swimming and enjoying public parks along the lake with my sister growing up is one of the reasons I connect deeply to the city's natural spaces today and work to conserve them. And the areas surrounding Lake Washington are the ancestral homelands of Coast Salish peoples, including the Duwamish. And during periods of early white settlement of Seattle, Native people moved from traditional villages along Lake Washington, and settlers lowered the level of the lake in the name of progress, reshaping several waterways central to the cultural lifeways of Native tribes in this area. And I just encourage you to join me in researching the natural and cultural history of the places where you live, work, and recreate, which is the Salish Sea region, our shared home.
Great. Thank you, Connor. Good thing to keep in mind when we're talking about our conservation work affecting public lands. So again, welcome. The goal of tonight's event is to gather our conservation supporters, our donors, advocates, and stewards together to just share updates about our policy priorities and advocacy work here at the Mountaineers. We're about halfway through the year, and we'll kind of share where some of our priorities stand with Congress and the administration. And more importantly, we have some key opportunities to take action now and throughout the rest of the year. So we'll share about those and also share how you can learn some best practices for how to advocate for the outdoors with your elected officials to get the policies and the issues that we're talking about over the finish line before the end of the year. So we're hoping to make this kind of a twice annual event so that you all have a chance to connect with Connor and I, learn about what we're working on, and get updates and learn how to get more involved. So here's our agenda. We're going to give a brief overview of our conservation work for folks who maybe aren't super familiar with that. We're going to talk about our new conservation e-learning course, Advocacy 101, which a lot of you, I can see you already know about it, but just wanted to share that resource, some policy updates, and current and upcoming opportunities for advocacy. And we'll have some time for Q&A. We've got a pretty small group today, so if you have a burning question, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you. We do have a lot of information to go through, so might work to save questions for the end, but if you got a burning question, feel free to use the raise hand feature. You can also unmute and interrupt me and Connor and shout it out. So we want to make sure this event is helpful and that you come away learning something and have a nice hour together. So we are going to start with just a brief overview of conservation at the Mountaineers. We have 3 pillars of our conservation work here: education, stewardship, and advocacy. We've got a lot of folks on the call who do some awesome stewardship work for the Mountaineers. Today, we are going to be talking mostly about advocacy, which is work that our conservation staff team leads, and members are involved in terms of helping us shape the direction of that policy work and help us advocate together. So when we talk about advocacy, what is advocacy? So Advocacy encompasses a broad range of activities, including education, organizing, and lobbying to affect public policy. So advocacy is a big reason we're able to protect the public lands and waters that we cherish, that our programs depend on. It's because Mountaineers and other conservation advocates over the years have spoken up to elected officials and designated wilderness areas, public lands funding opportunities, and other important policies that protect our shared lands. So our conservation team, Connor and I and Nate, advocate on behalf of our community. We are speaking with our elected officials and their staff on a regular basis. And we activate our members to advocate directly as well. So if you're here, you're probably subscribed to our Conservation Currents e-newsletter. You get our action alerts. You click and take action, and that's exactly what we're talking about here today. So what do we advocate for? So our advocacy agenda is listed here. We kind of have 4 buckets of topics that encompass, conservation and recreation policies to protect public lands, our climate, and sustainable outdoor access. So those buckets are landscape conservation, conserving the lands that our activities, our programs depend on. That could take the form of wilderness designations or protective actions through the administration. Public lands funding is something that we are consistently out front advocating for. If you're a recreationist, you see the effects of underfunding on public lands up close and personal. I'll talk about it a little bit more later, but we're advocating for robust funding for public lands and waters, sustainable outdoor access, so ensuring that recreation is managed sustainably on public lands and waters, different policy changes that need to happen to make that possible, which we'll talk about tonight, and then climate action, taking action to make sure that the lands and waters are protected through advocacy for climate change policies. So that's a brief synopsis of those 4 key areas. And we're going to be highlighting 1 or 2 main issues and advocacy actions within each of those 4 buckets. So these topics apply to both the state and the federal level of government. Today, we're going to be talking mostly about the federal level. The next state legislative session starts in January of 2025, so you'll be hearing a lot more about state legislative activities closer to the end of the year, getting ready for that. But right now, we're focused on the federal level, and a cool statistic, if you didn't know it, is that 60% of Mountaineers courses and trips happen on federal public lands. And so we tend to kind of emphasize that a little bit more in our advocacy work, because those Forest Service lands, those Park Service lands are so important for the Mountaineers. So with that kind of just brief summation of what our advocacy work looks like, I'm going to turn it over to Connor to talk about how you can learn some best practices for advocacy yourself.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. So as you all think have a good sense, we love our e-learning courses here at the Mountaineers, and we now have 3 conservation-focused courses that work through our e-learning platform CoAssemble. And these courses can help you go from an outdoor enthusiast to an outdoor advocate. And for any folks that have taken these courses, I know Regina already put in the chat that she's taken Public Lands 101 and is ready to dive into Advocacy 101. If anyone's taken our courses, feel free to share that in the chat as well. We'd love to see that. So there's no prerequisites for each of these courses. They all stand alone as individual courses, but we like to think of the e-learning journey of these 3 courses, starting with low impact recreation. So low impact recreation is our first conservation e-learning course. It's required by some activity-based Mountaineers courses and covers how to lessen your impact on the landscape while recreating. So I think of it as like Leave No Trace Plus. So I think a lot of folks have taken that. And then after taking low impact recreation, we think a nice natural segue is Public Lands 101, which used to be Protecting Public Lands 101. And along with the rollout of Advocacy 101, the new course back in January, we did a refresh for Public Lands 101. So Public Lands 101 teaches about the different types of federal public lands, how they're managed, including their varying recreational uses, and provides a good background for participation in outdoor advocacy. So kind of knowing the different types of federal public lands, and can really just, I guess, provide a great background when you're out on the landscape and encountering land managers or trail projects and things like that. So Public Lands 101, and then the new course, Advocacy 101. Again, we launched that back in January, and it serves as a dedicated advocacy training tool for our community. And these are individual courses. Like I said, they're not part of a series, and we hope that you explore them, all three of them. Earn your badges. Mountaineers love badges, so you can get a badge for completing each of those. So low impact recreation, Public Lands 101, and then advocacy. So on the next slide, we get into a little more about advocacy here. And okay, Advocacy 101. So again, we wanted to give our members and supporters a more systematic way to learn about advocacy and engage in advocacy. It builds individual and organizational advocacy taking muscle through skills and best practices. It helps grow our cohort of advocates for future lobby days. I know many of our members participate in lobby days offered by our partners like Washington Trails Association or the Washington Wildlife and Recreation Coalition. That's all great stuff. Betsy and I and other staff participate in those, and we'd love seeing our members out there. But we really have a long-term goal of really at the right time where it makes the most sense doing a dedicated Mountaineers lobby day, either virtually or maybe in Olympia or on the federal level, like I said, virtually. So want to just continue to build our cohort of advocates and really build that culture of conservation throughout the Mountaineers. So, and this is a great way to do that. So in the course, you'll find an introduction to advocacy, which breaks down the basics of advocacy, the why. So why do the Mountaineers advocate? Why is it important for you to advocate? An important context and best practices for engaging with lawmakers and land managers. So I think of Advocacy 101, the two main components that we dig into, lawmaker engagement and land manager engagement. So lawmakers, again, we focus on members of Congress and the federal level, but a lot of these best practices apply on down the line. So for your state representatives, state senators, and local elected officials as well. So, and then land managers don't represent you like elected officials do, but it's still important for them to hear from you on issues that affect outdoor recreation and conservation. And we'll get into a little bit later in the presentation why you're uniquely positioned to be an effective outdoor advocate. So we round out the Advocacy 101 e-course by reinforcing the knowledge you gain through skills and advocacy actions, so prompting a few advocacy actions. And then there's a quiz for lawmaker engagement and a quiz for land manager engagement as well. And we also include and encourage you to create your own advocacy plan. So what issues do you want to advocate on? What really draws you? What do you want to speak up on? And jot down some ways that you intend to do that. So more than 50 Mountaineers have already completed Advocacy 101. I think the signups were like on nearing 200. So lots of interest, and appreciate you all considering that one. So to sign up and take the course, you can scan the QR code. Oh, wait, sorry, we don't have a QR code on this one. Bree can put a link in the chat for the e-learning page where you can access all three of those. And on to the next slide. All right. Public lands are changing and storing visitation. If you read our conservation blogs, you've heard us mention these issues. You're intimately familiar with how these issues manifest out on the landscape, but increased use, soaring visitation, climate change impacts like melting glaciers, increased duration and intensity frequency of wildfires, increasing wildfire case on the western side of the Cascades, lack of land manager funding, and how that affects the condition and the natural state of our lands and our ability to get out there sustainably and equitably. So those are some of the challenges. We believe it's critically important that outdoor enthusiasts speak up on behalf of their public lands, and Mountaineers make effective outdoor advocates. Thanks to your knowledge, your firsthand experiences of these challenges facing our natural landscapes, and the compelling stories that you can customize one of our action alerts or message, call, or write to one of your members of Congress, or share through a public comment directly. Those stories that you can tell through those action opportunities, they really translate into effective advocacy. So, for example, you can be a powerful advocate for climate action since you've seen firsthand that glaciers are receding or that wildfires are increasingly affecting our forest here in Washington. So when taking action, how you personalize the message with decision makers, again, makes it even more effective. So as we share policy updates throughout this webinar today, we elevate several current advocacy actions where you can leverage those experiences. And Betsy's going to get into that starting with the next slide.
All right. So just a reminder about those 4 buckets. We're going to share 1 or 2 current issues related to each of those and an advocacy action you can take. So we're going to start with public lands funding. So as I mentioned before, this is a really important issue for our members, for our courses. As Connor said, we have increasing recreational use and declining land manager budgets. So more and more people are getting out on the landscape, but there aren't enough staff to pump toilets and make sure restrooms are open, make sure that trailheads have the right signage and that the roads are maintained and the trails are maintained and people are there to process permits and collect fees and you name it. There's just a real need to better steward lands, not just for outdoor recreation, but to protect them against climate change and invasive species and intensifying wildfires, you name it. So that's the reason why we're very strong advocates for adequate funding for the agencies that manage public lands and waters. So at the federal level, we're talking about the Forest Service, the Park Service, and the BLM. So how are those agencies funded? They're funded every year by Congress. So Congress passes annual spending bills to fund the government, and that's called appropriations. So it's something that happens every year, and we're in there advocating every year. If you follow the news, you know that Congress has been pretty dysfunctional lately, and they only completed last year's appropriations bills in March, which was halfway through the fiscal year. So because of a number of different factors, that debt limit deal that was done last year being the primary reason, there was just a lower top line funding amount for all agencies, including land management agencies. So that meant that public lands funding was cut by about 7% over last year. So we're seeing the effects of that in Washington, and it's just a couple of years or a couple of months into that new funding. So we don't know all of the effects yet, but one that was kind of the first one that I heard of a concrete effect of lack of funding is that the Golden West Visitor Center in Stehekin will be closed this summer. North Cascades just had to make some decisions with, a lack of funding. It's just like our budgets, right? You got to cut somewhere. So they chose to cut some staffing at Stehekin, just given that area receives less visitation than the Highway 20 corridor. So that's a direct effect. And as Connor mentioned, that's something that you can say in your letters, and talk about other effects on the ground that you're seeing from lack of funding. So this year we're advocating for increased funding for the Forest Service and the BLM in particular. We don't have too many BLM lands in Washington, but we have a whole bunch of Forest Service land, and recreation is severely underfunded in those agencies. The Park Service actually gets comparatively more funding for public services than the Forest Service does. So we're targeting the Forest Service in particular, and we've worked out some numbers with our partners at Outdoor Alliance that show like a funding decrease of, I think it's like 30% at the Forest Service over the past 10 years, while visitation has increased something like 50%. So it's a pretty clear, if you look at the trend lines on your graph, it's a pretty clear example of things going in the wrong direction. So now is a really great time to reach out to your elected officials. They're writing the bills to fund the government for the next fiscal year as we speak. We've been in touch with Senator Murray's office and Senator Cantwell's office about this issue, and we'd love your support in writing them as well. There's the QR code. You can bring out your phone and kind of take a picture, or Bree's also going to link that action alert in the chat. And this allows you to customize that action. You can also, if you prefer calling the offices, you can look up Senator Murray's DC office number, Senator Cantwell, and whoever your representative is, and give them a call and tell them to prioritize Forest Service funding for recreation. So that is the latest update on public lands funding. We also work on state public lands funding, but we'll be circling back to you all at the end of fall for more information about that. So next up, I'm going to hand it over to Connor on sustainable outdoor access.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. So with growing outdoor, with the growing popularity of outdoor recreation in Washington State and across the country, land managers need new tools and resources to manage recreation sustainably on these public lands. And the Mountaineers and our partners at Outdoor Alliance have been advocating for federal legislation that improves sustainable and equitable outdoor access. One of the individual bills is the SOAR Act, but there's now a package of several federal recreation bills. And in the House, U.S. House, it's known as the Explore Act. So that's the Expanding Public Lands Recreation Experiences Act, which actually did pass the House earlier this spring and is currently pending in the Senate. The Senate has their own version of a federal recreation package called AORA, and which passed out of committee in the Senate last year. And there's several of the individual bills. Two of our top policy priorities, the SOAR Act, the Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act, and the Park Act, Protect America's Rock Climbing Act. I know we're throwing a lot of acronyms at you. The SOAR Act would improve the unpredictable federal recreational permitting system. So the permits that the Mountaineers, other nonprofits getting folks outdoors on federal public lands in groups, and outfitter guides need to get permits to take folks outdoors on those lands. And the system that the federal agencies use actually creates barriers for access, barriers to people who want to experience the outdoors through groups like the Mountaineers. And just a really complex and labor-intensive system to navigate, but it actively limits our ability to expand our programs and introduce more folks to the outdoors and experiences out there. And so we've been working in coalitions, the Coalition for Outdoor Access, which is a coalition of outfitter guide groups on the SOAR Act for many years, and we're really stoked that it's been included in this larger package, the Explore Act in the House, and that it's moving and could potentially be passed by the end of the year. So another piece of the Explore Act is legislation to protect wilderness climbing and canyoning, which is the Park Act I mentioned. It's related to the fixed anchors issue that's currently coming up through land management planning for the Forest Service and the Park Service right now, and Betsy's going to talk more about that shortly. Again, we've been working to pass the SOAR Act for many years. It's got bipartisan support in both chambers of the House. These rec packages do, and so we're really coming up to a critical inflection point with this at the end of the year, given the election coming up this fall and likely shifting around of power in Congress. I think just the end of the year represents the best chance to really get a rec package across the finish line, and that's where you come in. We've done several action alerts already on this issue, but the QR code on this slide and link in the chat will take you to our action form. You could send a message both to your representative and your senators. Your representative, it's more of a thank you message for the House passing the Explore Act, and then the Senate has a little more of a target message urging them to pass the bill by the end of the year. So that's that issue. Again, a big package of bills, but a lot of good stuff that would bring good changes for sustainable and equitable outdoor access. Over to Betsy.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the fixed anchor issue that Connor mentioned, and this is one that those of you climbers might be especially interested in hearing about. So what is a fixed anchor? It's essentially a bolt or a sling, something that climbers use um, in wilderness. It's largely to rappel down safely when it's not possible to use natural protection. So many of our courses and programs and many of our members rely on these sorts of fixed anchors to navigate challenging terrain, to get down safely.
Yeah, it's very warm, but
but bolts and slings are meant to be rare in wilderness. Bolts even have to be hand drilled. So we're not talking about sport climbs, bunch of bolts. We're talking about pretty strategically placed pieces of protection so that climbers can safely navigate alpine climbing and mountaineering. So currently fixed anchors, bolts and slings are allowed under the Wilderness Act, but the Park Service and the Forest Service have proposed reclassifying them as installations, which are prohibited in wilderness, just like any sort of road or structure or building is prohibited. So this means that fixed anchors would also be prohibited unless they are allowed on a case-by-case basis through a time-consuming administrative process called the minimum requirements analysis. So we're pretty concerned about the impact of this change to our community. Safety reasons, obviously, but also just a negative impact to the ability to teach climbing in wilderness areas on public lands. Also an impact to our conservation work. So climbers are wilderness advocates because they get to experience those places doing the activity that they love. So if that sort of climbing was made harder to do in wilderness, we fear that we wouldn't have as strong of a coalition in support for wilderness areas in the future. So where does it stand? We've filed comments with the Forest Service and the Park Service. We encouraged our community to speak up, and we're waiting to hear what the final guidance will look like. We're expecting that within a few months. We're also, as Connor mentioned, supporting the Explore Act, which would say essentially that Congress says climbing is an appropriate use of wilderness. And so that has the potential to change what the agencies are doing. So right now, the best way to advocate for safe and sustainable climbing in wilderness areas is to advocate for the Explore Act to do that action alert that Connor shared. But we'll definitely keep our community updated on how this issue unfolds. So that is wilderness climbing. And next up, we're going to shift gears to landscape conservation.
Great. Thanks, Betsy. All right, so landscape conservation. So I think most of you might have a sense that landscape conservation has been a big piece of the Mountaineers conservation ethic, conservation work since our founding. So our Mountaineers members were very instrumental in protecting places like Olympic National Park, North Cascades National Park, Alpine Lakes Wilderness, and one of the main pieces of our current landscape conservation work, again, that bucket of our advocacy agenda is advocating for the Wild Olympics bill. So the Wild Olympics Wilderness and Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was first introduced by Senator Murray and Representative Derek Kilmer from Washington's 6th District, which is the Olympic Peninsula, back in 2012. So it's been out there for a long time. It's been gaining broad support across the peninsula and seeing really great progress going through Congress in the last few years, but hasn't made it across the finish line. So the Wild Olympics bill would designate the first wilderness areas on the Olympic National Forest in more than 30 years, and the first ever wild and scenic rivers on the Olympic Peninsula. So wild and scenic rivers are like a wilderness designation for wild flowing, free flowing rivers. And our partners at American Whitewater do a lot of great work on that advocacy as well, and through our Outdoor Alliance Washington Coalition. So if passed through Congress, the Wild Olympics bill would protect more than 126,000 acres of federal land managed by Olympic National Forest by the Forest Service, including the Dungeness River Valley, which is the photo we have on the slide. Lots of great hiking and recreation out in several of these areas that would be protected by the Wild Olympics bill. We're going to share a petition here in a second through the coalition, and on the coalition's website, if you just Google wildolympics.org, there's a great recreation map that shows key recreation areas that would be protected by this bill. So the bill would also protect clean water, fish and wildlife habitat, recreational opportunities, like I mentioned, by those 19 wild and scenic river designations. And yeah, so the bill also enjoys broad and strong local support across the Olympic Peninsula and in the Hood Canal region, and that's been a big piece of the campaign through the years, is just getting local elected officials and community members to support the bill. So kind of where we're at with the bill, it's less of a big grassroots push, and it's more behind the scenes, us and our partners engaging with staff in Congress to see, could there be an appetite for another public lands package by the end of the current Congress, again with changing political landscape likely on the horizon. Next year, a big public lands package might not be as feasible, so we're really seeing the next few months and towards the end of the year as the window for this. And so that's why it would be great to have you add your support as a supporter for the campaign. And again, over the last decade, the Mountaineers have worked with a diverse partners in this coalition to really build support for the bill. So, and again, these are the places where we like to hike, camp, and explore on the peninsula. So we're cautiously optimistic that there's a window. And again, the way that you can help build support for that is sign the coalition petition, which we have on the QR code or the link in the chat. And again, that's the coalition website. That's not a Mountaineers action form, but appreciate your consideration of that. So, and Derek Kilmer is retiring this year. This is his last year in Congress. So let's try to send him out with a great celebration, getting this bill across the finish line.
All right. So last but not least, I know this is coming at you fast and furious, but in terms of climate action, and this is also kind of a landscape conservation issue as well, but updating the Northwest Forest Plan. So this gets a little wonky, but essentially each national forest has a land management plan, which is the document that governs how the forest is managed. It's kind of almost like zoning in terms of what areas are conserved versus logged versus used for recreation. And the Northwest Forest Plan governs land management on 17 national forests in Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. So total is about 24 million acres of land. And so um, it's a forest plan amendment that applies to all that whole landscape. It was created in 1994 to essentially resolve an intense controversy over old growth logging. Um, if those of you who might have been around at that time remember, there was the spotted owl was becoming threatened, and we realized that the spotted owl relied on these old growth forests. We also learned a lot more about old growth forests and the value that they provide to ecosystems around the same time, and said time to stop logging these places. And that gave us the Northwest Forest Plan. So it was a compromise. It set aside a lot of areas for conservation and old growth forests preservation, but it also allowed logging in certain places to support communities economically. Um, but fast forward 30 years, a lot has changed. Um, Particularly, wildfires are more intense, our forests are more vulnerable to climate change, and the plan needs to be modernized. So the Forest Service is undergoing a process of amending the plan to address these challenges of today. So again, addressing climate adaptation, fire resiliency. So they've gone through the scoping process and will be releasing a draft environmental impact statement this summer. So they're using the NEPA process, and the next step is that draft EIS this summer. So this is going to be a great opportunity to get involved for the forests where we recreate, where we really appreciate some of the last remaining old growth in the country. So again, no action right now, but stay tuned. I have kind of a front row seat to this process because I serve on the Federal Advisory Committee that's advising the U.S. Forest Service on the amendment. So I am representing recreation organizations on the advisory committee. That's kind of my seat. I'm the only recreation representative, and there isn't going to be a lot on recreation management in this amendment. It's more about preserving the forests that support our recreation opportunities. Still, super important work. So look out for that comment opportunity. Again, Conservation Currents is where you'll hear about it. We're also in the process of scheduling a potential event at the Seattle Program Center to kind of spotlight this comment opportunity and allow folks to learn more. So it's tentatively scheduled for July 30th. You are the first to hear about this. It is on the website, but it's hold for conservation event, so it's not even a formal event yet. So that's your sneak peek. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. That's again a kind of a wonky issue. We're talking about land planning and forest management, but super important so that forests don't burn down more than they already are. Not to end us on a sad note there. But that's the last update, policy update. Before we pause for questions, I'm going to turn it back to Connor to talk about how to get more involved.
Thanks, Betsy. So just want to underscore your advocacy truly does make a difference, right? So we're about to read a brief quote from Senator Murray from something she included in one of her constituent newsletters. Her quote goes, quote, "Every week I review the thousands of letters, emails, and calls my office receives. I sort through the topics and will frequently read many of the messages I receive personally. I hope you'll make your voice heard because it does matter." So yeah, I thought that would be great to hear. So we want to just through your attendance in this webinar and just beyond, just encourage you to engage with us. This is a photo of our team. That's Betsy and I with our new teammate, Nate. Email us with any questions or feedback that come up about our conservation work, land manager issues you're experiencing, or just advocacy in general. That's conservation@mountaineers.org. That goes to all three of us. My email is just connorm@mountaineers.org, and Betsy is just betsyr@mountaineers.org as well. Sign up for our conservation newsletter using the QR code or the link in the chat. It's the best way to hear about future updates from us and receive future action opportunities. And we appreciate your interest and engagement with us, Mountaineers Conservation and Advocacy, and hope you'll check out our Advocacy 101 e-learning course. We'll send a follow-up note with a recording from the event to all attendees and a post-event blog that I'm going to craft that includes all of the action opportunities that we highlighted today. So that's all we have, and we'll take any questions that folks have. And for questions, you can either put it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, and we'll have you come off mute. Uh-oh, I should have given Bree a question plant to get the conversation going.
Yeah, this is Dale.
Yeah.
What local issues are pending? What you talked about is mostly national, and what local issues are current?
You want to take that, Connor?
Dale, you were asking which local issues we're working on?
Yeah.
Okay. By local, do you mean like county, city issues or state issues?
Well, Western Washington or maybe
Okay.
Washington State, but
Okay.
That's
Sure.
our region.
Yeah. And we can get a link in the chat, but with for our advocacy, and Betsy was talking about this earlier, you know, we focus on federal and then state issues, partially because those are the lands that our programs are getting out on. We really don't weigh in on county, like municipal, county, state, city, county issues unless several of our priorities and programs intersect. So I don't think I have a current example of a local issue that we're weighing in on, but as far as the state goes, one of the, and this kind of associates with climate action and kind of the bucket of our advocacy agenda that really focuses on climate. The Climate Commitment Act, which is the state's cap and invest program, which was passed in 2019, has been doing a lot of great work to get funding out there for natural climate solutions and energy reductions throughout the state to meet our aggressive targets through that bill. There's an initiative that's on the November general election ballot to repeal and significantly gut the Climate Commitment Act. So the Mountaineers is taking a position to oppose the initiative and support the Climate Commitment Act. We'll be publishing a blog in the next month or two on that. So as far as the state issue, that's one of the issues that we've been focusing on, again, because areas where Mountaineers, where we lead our programs, have received funding, revenue generated from that Cap and Invest program from the Climate Commitment Act, and it's just been a big boon for land managers and really tackling the climate crisis here in Washington State. So that's the best example. Betsy, does anything else coming up for you?
Are there any land acquisitions that are needed in the short or midterm? I know we have helped purchase with TPO and other organizations, help purchase land to guarantee long-term conservation in the past, but they've been sporadic.
Yeah, there's a couple examples of that. One is the Washington Climbers Coalition are purchasing a property at Index that they're going to transfer to, I believe it's the state park there. So we're helping get the word out about that and figure out if there's an opportunity to get state funding for that parcel. It's currently a private land parcel. So that's one. The other example is a state program called the Trust Land Transfer Program, and it's a Department of Natural Resources program where they take land from their trust lands, which are usually timberlands, and transfer them into protected status, natural areas, or um, conservation areas, and that's a program that the state legislature has helped reinvigorate and fund with our support over the last couple of years. And there's a number of parcels, so it's more of a transfer than actual land acquisition, but it's transferring them into a status that's more beneficial for those particular landscapes. And so there's parcel in Tiger Mountain, parcel in the Morningstar area off of the Mountain Loop Highway, bunch of other ones around the state, but that's one that that is actually supported by that Climate Commitment Act funding that Connor talked about. So really important to vote against that initiative this fall.
Right. Good. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Question in the chat about how can the Mountaineers advocate for the glaciers? Yes, that is advocating for climate action. Unfortunately, addressing climate change is the way that we're going to slow down global warming and slow down glacier recession. And so we advocate when it makes sense for us to kind of put our weight in for a certain action, and we're supporting that Climate Commitment Act priority, as well as the federal Inflation Reduction Act that passed a couple of years ago that will put, it's like $400 million into climate action, like solar panels and wind generation and improving the electricity grid and clean transportation. And so that's going to help speed up climate action at a federal level. So both state and federal climate action is kind of what we're working on to address threats that public lands face from global warming, including glaciers melting, intensifying wildfires, all the other things that we see out on our landscape. Any other burning questions? And if there's no questions, I'd also love to hear what folks in particular are caring about and interested in advocating for, or other things that you're involved in.
Betsy, may I say something?
My name's
Regina. Hi, everybody. I have been working with the Forest Service, Cowlitz County, just recently Lewis County, on invasive species removal at Mount St. Helens. We're holding our 8th work party this weekend, and we are extremely excited. We have some really good new tools to get out and do our job. We are also working with the Forest Service and Mount St. Helens Institute, not just on invasive species removal, but potentially native species seed collection, so that we can rehabilitate some of the areas that have been kind of devastated by other users. That's a topic for another time, but we're looking at seed collection in the fall, and we're looking at hoping to take over some of the care of some of the trails around Mount St. Helens, Coldwater Lake, the hummocks, and things of that nature. So if anybody would love to join our work parties, we have our first ever 3-day work party coming up in September, and we have a 2-day work party this weekend.
Awesome. Thanks, Regina. That's super exciting. Yeah, there's this event was definitely focused on advocacy, but there's really great work happening all over the branches with stewardship and did we link the stewardship activities page? If you're interested in getting more involved in that, you can go on our website and find a stewardship activities and find the one that Regina is talking about.
I'd maybe just like to say a big thank you, because I think we all care about this stuff, but it's so overwhelming sometimes to get the right information and to know what we can do. So I really appreciate the way you folks target things for us and help us understand what the issues are, what's at stake, and make it easy for us to advocate in through your blogs and things. So anyway, thank you. I'm already thinking about what I've got to get busy.
Thank you so much,
yeah.
Ginger. Appreciate it. Yeah, we try and be really strategic about what we choose to advocate for, so we're not spreading ourselves too thin. I mean, if you think about all of the issues facing the environment, there's a million things we could advocate for, but we try and be really targeted about what's going to make the biggest impact, what's most aligned with our mission, and so we try and be strategic about that. We have a conservation and advocacy committee that meets, I think it's 4 times a year now, that helps advise us on how we should be advocating and what we should be prioritizing. So we have some awesome volunteers who are helping us out with that.
And the initiative that's on the ballot for November, is that initiative 2117?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, because I've been seeing a lot of stuff about that and didn't take, I thought I'll wait till the voter pamphlet comes out to read it, but yeah, I appreciate your cluing us in, because I'm already picking up that there's some heated debate on that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure. I just put the link to the No on 2117 campaign in the chat, but we'll share that in the blog. And again, we'll share kind of why we came to this decision as the Mountaineers to come out on this issue. It's certainly, and also explain that it's in line with our 501c3 status and just the lobbying work that we do, and all on the up and up, and just a way for really us to live our values when it comes to climate.
Well, we'll stay on until 7:30 if there's any last questions, or you want to chat about something without everyone present, but don't want to keep you from your dinner or the rest of your evening, and feel free to sign off. But thanks so much for attending and learning a little bit more about our conservation policy work. We really appreciate it. Please stay in touch, and we'll be sharing all those future opportunities to advocate with you through Conservation Currents. There's a lot going on, lots of issues that need your voice. So thank you so much for being involved.
Yeah, thank you for doing this.